War. War never changes. But the world around us certainly adheres to no such concept. Every new day brings countless possibilities, opportunities, successes to be had, and mistakes to be made. Indeed, every decision followed, every road not taken, can have consequences ranging from utterly insignificant to a single event, changing the entire world. By popular demand, and in the appropriate spirit of democracy and capitalism,
I can milk you.
we're bringing Fallout to this channel. Don't worry, Metro, my beloved, we will come back for you. Before diving deeper into the lore with a running series, it is important to understand the nature of the setting. The Fallout universe, so similar yet so different to our own world, or perhaps is it more correct to say timeline, is a curious case of an alternative path that humanity may have set upon, were certain factors different. Up to a certain historical point, virtually indistinguishable from each other, reality and the Fallout setting eventually separate to a point of clear distinction, with nothing but distant echoes of our world reminding us that, at one point, the two timelines may have been one and the same. The so-called butterfly effect is a concept within chaos theory, which is the study of random behaviors within a deterministic system, and it implies that one small change, such as the flap of a butterfly's wings, may result in a large change in a later state. In this example, the disturbance of the wing flapping eventually causing a tornado weeks later. So, what was the theoretical butterfly that caused the timeline of Fallout to split or diverge from our own? The exact moment is never canonically confirmed, instead left deliberately vague, such that small-time YouTubers can autistically rant about it for 20 minutes. The most clear difference between the two worlds being, of course, the global thermonuclear exchange, which occurred on October 23rd, 2077, within the Fallout setting, being the premise for the game series, when, in our reality, this has obviously not happened. But then again, it's not 2077 yet.
Always you three?
That being said, I have narrowed the potential divergence to a total of 3 possible theories, each one progressively more and more schizophrenic. The most common and widely accepted theory suggests that the divergence happened at some point soon after the end of World War II. According to this theory, while there are certainly some observable differences prior to the conclusion of the conflict, they are minor and inconsequential, even if seemingly important, like the discovery of an entire precursor civilization on Earth.
See, nobody cares. Nice hat.
The real divergence starts occurring in the post-war period of both worlds. At first, the differences were not noticeable, and the two timelines followed similar paths. For example, it is easy to see the obvious influence of the real-world 1950s era culture on everything in-game, from clothing styles, vehicles, to the futurism and Art Deco architecture. However, unlike our reality, the culture within the Fallout setting seems to be in stasis, the atomic era aesthetic remaining dominant for over 100 years, and until the very point of the nukes dropping. Just like in the real post-war era, the so-called Red Menace phenomenon, the fear and perceived threat of communism, was prevalent in the pre-apocalyptic Fallout setting and shaped the political, cultural, and socio-economic landscape of the world.
You go over to China. 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 You take China.
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 Where it gets interesting is that the ideological struggle of capitalism and communism did indeed result in the Cold War, much like in our timeline. However, the divergence is that in Fallout, instead of the conflict with the Soviet Union, the United States' main beef was with the People's Republic of China, which never underwent the real world free market and economic liberalization reforms under Deng Xiaoping. Instead, in the Fallout universe, it was China that was the leader of global communism, and the USSR, having never collapsed in 1991 like it did in our world, was on neutral terms with the United States. It is the ideological rivalry between China and the US that would eventually lead to the Sino-American War, which would culminate in the thermonuclear exchange that we all know and love.
Their output ground, which is, I think, this. So I guess this. Try to measure the AC output using my.
The fickle art of politics aside, another major factor in the divergence of the real timeline and the Fallout universe is the path of technological development taken by each world. Very fittingly to the Fallout setting and future events, the in-game post-war scientific advancements went along the route of nuclear power instead of the digital and electronic developments our world saw. Not just used in weapons of mass destruction, the atom became a prominent source of energy on a level that we have never seen in our reality, with large-scale nuclear fission reactors powering entire towns being a very common occurrence. Just like in our world, mobility and compactness were highly sought after as technology developed, and nuclear reactors became smaller and smaller in size. Eventually, they were reduced to such an extent that they replaced internal combustion engines in vehicles and electricity generators, and even portable batteries were created on the basis of nuclear fission. Nuclear fusion, the combination of atoms as opposed to the fission splitting, was eventually harnessed as an even more powerful and cleaner alternative. Developed to a much greater extent in Fallout than in our timeline, fusion began to supplant fission as the premier power source, and was used in everything from powering weapons and exoskeleton armors to vehicles and robotics. Robotics, too, in the Fallout universe developed far greater than in our own. Indeed, the pre-war society was permeated by artificial assistants. From civilian applications, such as manual labor and even childcare, to military operations, robots were widely used in the setting pre- and post the nuclear apocalypse. Ranging from bipedal protectrons to hovering Mr. Handy models, all the way to the enormous Liberty Prime, built to retake Alaska from the Chinese invaders during the previously mentioned Sino-American War. Interestingly also, despite the limitations of the technological path the Fallout universe embarked on that we will discuss later, the setting is home to advanced artificial intelligence programs, commonly seen in the aforementioned robots. From extremely basic programs that follow simple commands, to simulated personalities of particular models, and all the way to the synths, which are so indistinguishable from humans that this phenomenon forms the main ethical dilemma of the fourth game. Despite all these technological marvels, there is a striking contradiction in the scientific advancement of the Fallout setting. In the year 2077, with nuclear-powered cars and quasi-sentient robotic servants, digital computers are large, bulky devices relying on text-based input rather than the graphical user interfaces that we are familiar with today. Television sets and radios are similarly reminiscent of the 1950s era in size and style, with screens being based on the same monochromatic cathode ray tubes as the aforementioned computers. Data is still stored on disks and tapes, and while the computing power of technology in Fallout was clearly advanced, The science in this setting obviously failed to prioritize the miniaturization of computers and electronics that was achieved in our reality, begging the question, why? The single most logical point of divergence in this entire theory, the year 1947 in our world, saw the invention of the transistor by three scientists at Bell Labs, for which they won a Nobel Prize in 1956. The transistor is a semiconductor that allows amplifying or switching electrical signals and power. For example, it can amplify the weaker signals a radio antenna receives and make it strong enough to be heard through a speaker. The transistor replaced the previously used, much larger and less energy efficient vacuum tubes that are still prominent in Fallout, and is one of the basic building blocks of our modern electronics and is the foundation of integrated circuits. The invention of a more reliable and smaller semiconductor completely revolutionized the field of electronics in our world and allowed for devices to be not only cheaper, but much smaller in size. In the Fallout universe, transistors were invented at an unspecified, but much later date. Because of this, their use was not as widespread as in our reality, sending the setting of Fallout down a very different technological path, affecting every aspect of life, from economics to politics, and, of course, the 1950s influence on the perpetual atomic era cultural stasis in Fallout isn't random.
Well, actually, the writers here at Bethesda just really vibed with the 50s aesthetic, and that's the only reason why the games appear to be...
Not now, Todd. Let Daddy speculate. Now, as some of you may realize, I am not American, but I will do my best to be as accurate as possible in this section. The real-world 1950s in the US were defined by the post-war economic boom, which in turn led to the rise in consumerism, a theme very much prevalent within the pre-apocalypse Fallout setting, with even the safety from potential nuclear catastrophe being sold as a product. The 50s also saw the intensification of the Cold War between capitalist and communist superpowers, as mentioned earlier, and, as a result, a rise in patriotic sentiment and national unity. These two phenomena would blend into a unique type of patriotism, the Cold War and the culture of consumerism and conformity, giving rise to a strong national identity and the desire to follow the American dream way of life. The two worlds diverged when our reality entered the 60s, a period of significant cultural, societal, and political change, with a rise in counterculture being of particular note. In an era famously defined by the Vietnam War, this conflict faced strong domestic opposition, with protests and demonstrations being commonplace. The 70s saw an even bigger rise in the anti-establishment counterculture, with the disillusionment of the post-Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal reducing trust in the government. The Fallout universe seemingly never underwent these changes, and the 50s atomic era influence chosen for the pre-apocalypse setting represents the conformity and values of the in-game universe, the cultural aesthetic itself being conserved over the future decades. The 50s encapsulates the peak of the Cold War tension and the fear of nuclear annihilation, with real-life Fallout shelters
Say that again?
becoming the symbol of these anxieties, this being, of course, central to the theme of the games. The conformity and faith in the establishment so common in the 50s was prevalent throughout the Fallout timeline, as thousands naively ran to the Vault-Tec shelters as the bombs dropped, only to be subjected to the horrific human experiments planned for them all along. Fallout and its 50s stasis is a dystopian image of humanity's greed, blind faith, and cultural refusal or perhaps an ability to evolve, leading to its radioactive downfall. All that being said, however, you could argue that the cultural difference is not itself a divergence, but simply a product of it. This brings us right back to where this discussion started, the year 1947 and the invention of the transistor, or, in Fallout's case, the failure to do so. As we previously observed, the transistor allowed for the affordability and mass production of all electronics, which includes televisions, portable radios, computers, and eventually the internet. These technologies allowed for an accelerated spread of new culture and ideas in our world, while in the Fallout setting, the less developed vacuum tube reliant media led to difficulties in production and distribution, allowing for more government and corporation control. With fewer channels of communication, the top-down government propaganda was the dominant form of media, and despite the incredible technological advances in other areas, the authoritarian establishment in pre-war Fallout retained control over public perceptions. Hence, the Cold War in Fallout universe was allowed to last all the way until 2066, without any major public fatigue or pushback, and would eventually result in the setting-defining nuclear exchange. But what could have been the reason for the different development of both worlds? Sheer luck? Interference by the government or some powerful corporation? Or perhaps the influence and the resulting point of divergence was not of earthly origin at all?
I am telling you right now, that motherfucker back there is not real.
While the first theory is relatively grounded, the second theory is a group of various more abstract and speculative divergences. In the Fallout universe, aliens are very much real, and more importantly, very much active. Appearing multiple times throughout the games, these so-called Zetans have been not so secretly interfering with human affairs both pre- and post the nuclear war. The earliest known abduction of a human dates all the way back to the 16th century Edo period of feudal Japan, potentially placing the point of divergence there. Despite multiple abductions, however, society at large first noticed these suspicious activities with the disappearance of a US astronaut Colonel Hartigan in the 1960s. Various groups, such as Quare Verum, emerged, investigating the extraterrestrial activity, and the alien conspiracy gained national recognition, with multiple accusations against government and corporations having contact with the alien civilization. The Zetan interference was not limited to kidnappings, however. The aliens at some point were attempting to get the ICBM launch codes, giving rise to the theory that it was possibly they that started the Great War, perhaps for the purpose of their continuous human experiments. Whether they caused the war or not, the constant Zetan interference and influence could have been the push that sent the Fallout universe down its separate path to our own.
All right. Hey there, demons. It's me, your boy. I'm standing near your hole, and it's very dark.
Not only are there extraterrestrial influences on the world of Fallout, but supernatural too. Ug Qualtoth is an eldritch being prominent across several pieces of Fallout media, worshipped as a god by those driven insane by its visions. Little is known about what this mysterious entity is, but its supernatural powers are undeniable. Worshipped as a deity by the swamp folk of Point Lookout, the eldritch being granted an artifact, the Krivbeknich, a tome that granted long life and incredible influence to its priests. Human sacrifices to this dark god took place even before the war, and after the bombs dropped, The areas associated with the cult, such as the Dunwich building near Washington, D.C., continued to drive the locals insane. However, these supernatural occurrences are limited to very localized areas, and the raving madmen and lunatics under the Eldritch Horror's influence did not have a massive impact on the setting. The Hermaeus Mora wannabe suffers from a massive skill issue and is hardly responsible for anything more than gaslighting a bunch of inbred rednecks, and certainly nothing as impactful as the Divergence, but it is still worth mentioning as a notable difference between Fallout and our world.
But I'm sorry, if you only want to work 4 hours, it's going to be harder for you to get a house.
Oh, and don't mention 4 days. No, but
net worth of over $60 million accuse the younger generations of struggling financially because they're just too lazy.
In 1894, archaeologist Lorenzo Cabot discovered the ruins of an ancient city buried beneath the Rub al-Khali desert in the Arabian Peninsula. Cabot and his team excavated the mysterious ruins for weeks until they eventually came across what appeared to be a burial chamber with various artifacts and a coffin containing what appeared to be non-human skeleton wearing something similar to a crown. Donning this crown changed Lorenzo, physically and mentally. He stopped aging and developed psychic abilities, allowing him to communicate with these precursor beings. However, this influence drove him paranoid and insane, and he was eventually locked away in an asylum. Regardless of his later insanity, Cabot was correct. There indeed was a precursor civilization to the humans within the Fallout universe, unlike our own. Lorenzo speculated that there was a period of 4,000 years between the dawn of humanity and these precursors, and if taking the first signs of an organized human civilization to be roughly 9,500 BC, according to the archaeological evidence found in the Göbekli Tepe site in modern-day Turkey, this places the point of divergence as early as 13,500 BC. But what if the point of divergence was even earlier than that? Much, much earlier. The laws of physics, as is our understanding of them, are believed to have emerged from the conditions of the Big Bang that created our universe. Essentially, the way the universe expanded and cooled from the initial singularity shaped the constants that govern the universe today, and defined the fundamental forces like gravity, electromagnetism, and so on. It is these laws that form the basis of all life, as it exists and operates within these constraints. One of these fundamental forces is the so-called weak nuclear force, and is responsible for radioactive decay and processes like the very relevant nuclear fission and fusion mentioned in the first part of this video. Without delving too deep into the science behind it, nuclear decay and radiation are fundamentally different in the Fallout universe. The most clear example of this is the persistence of irradiated areas across the setting caused by the nuclear exchange 200 years earlier.
What kind of place is this?
In our reality, standard thermonuclear weapons have a fallout that will typically degrade to habitable levels within 6 to 18 months. Nukes are typically detonated prior to impact on the ground, in a so-called air burst, in order to spread the damage further. Because of this, the radiation would cover a very broad area and would quickly diffuse and be relatively harmless, certainly not making entire regions uninhabitable for centuries. The effects on organic matter too follow a Marvel kind of logic. Exposure to enough radiation may turn one into a ghoul, granting cool powers like biological immortality and an incredible healing factor, albeit at the small cost of never being able to wear sunglasses again. Whereas in real life, you would just get cancer and GG. Lastly, more proof can be seen in laser weapons, which are prevalent in Fallout. Being based on, you guessed it, the principle of non-ionizing radiation, the lasers in Fallout and our own world act very differently. Within the game setting, lasers are powerful weapons, capable of incinerating enemies entirely with a visible beam, sound effect, and even recoil. In the real world, powerful lasers certainly do exist, but the most common applications are for civilian purposes, and they are often invisible, only being noticeable when interacting with particles in the air. The purpose of this science lecture is its implication. Following fundamentally different laws, the Fallout setting is an entirely separate universe to ours, through insane probability following in the same steps as our reality, only for the differences to become apparent at a later stage. There it is, my friends. Every, in my opinion, plausible point of divergence that could separate the timeline of Fallout and our reality, though the last theory implies that Fallout is a separate universe altogether. Let me know your theories down in the comments, and if you agree or disagree with any of the points that I made. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and more Fallout and Elder Scrolls content is on the way. And as always, until we meet again.